Hey there. I'm Clara, and I've been on a roller coaster that I used to call my marriage for the near 2 decades. I know numbers, that's my game, I'm an economist. But I'll let you in on a secret, give me a drab room and a fresh lick of paint and I'll give you a masterpiece. That's where I really shine. Now, Tom, he's a whole different story. The guy's got brains, I'll give him that. Financial analyst, and a damn good one. We met back in college, both of us bright-eyed with textbooks in hand. Dreamt of the big family, the white picket fence, the whole shebang. Turns out, life had other plans. Docs gave us the hard truth, with me, babies just weren't going to happen. Crushed us for a while, yeah, but we bounced back, sorta. We decided, if not a house filled with kids' laughter, we'd fill it with something else, style, charm, call it what you will. We found this house, and signed up for a multi-year mortgage. A beast of a place, years upon years on its bones, creaking like an old ship. Most would have walked away, but not us, we saw what it could be. I remember walking through the door the first time, the smell of dust and forgotten times in the air. Tom was right alongside me, and he was talking big plans, like he did. You see this, Clara? This place is ours. A bit of elbow grease, and we'll make it into something. I laughed, shaking my head at his excitement. Elbow grease? Tom, this place will take more than that. But we'll do it. Room by room. The first couple of years were rough. Juggling jobs and paintbrushes, learning how to fix a pipe without flooding the kitchen. But every evening, we sat amid the chaos of renovation, beers in hand, and it felt like we were invincible. One night, in the middle of an argument about what color the living room should be, he wanted blue, I wanted green, he threw his hands up and cussed. Damn it, Clara, pick whichever. It's just a color. I shot back, just a color? Tom, this is important. It sets the whole mood of the house. I was half mad, half laughing, because who gets into a tiff over paint? The green one, by the way. He said it made my eyes look brighter, and that was that. Every choice, every little victory was ours. Then the house started taking shape, and I got a taste for it, really got a taste for it. The neighbors, friends, they couldn't stop yapping about how I turned the old wreck into something out of a magazine. Each room was a new project, a challenge that I chewed on until it was just right. The transformation wasn't just the house, it was me too. Here I was, sleeves rolled up, covered in paint splatters, fiercer than I ever felt pushing papers at my old economics gig. Holy mackerel, Clara, did you redo the bathroom again? Tom asked one evening, eyebrows raised higher than the new shower head. Yep, didn't like the first tiles we picked. These are better, see? I slapped the wall, proud as hell. He leaned in, squinting at the tiles. Looks the same to me, but if it makes you happy, then I'm all for it. Typical Tom, always played it cool, but I knew he was impressed. When the Lewis family from next door came over for dinner, Mrs. Lewis almost dropped her casserole walking into the dining room. I had to stifle a laugh. I'm sorry, Clara, but this is just... It's gorgeous. You did this? She was all wide-eyed, turning in circles, taking it all in. I shrugged, trying to act like it was no big deal, but inside I was buzzing. Yeah, I did. Got sick of the wallpaper and thought I'd try something new. New? This is a dang masterpiece. Mr. Lewis chimed in, his face all grins. That's it, I'm done with beige. Mrs. Lewis declared, like she was about to start a revolution. The compliments were one thing, but the kicker? When people started asking if I'd take a look at their places, offer some advice. Then one lady, bless her, asked what I'd charge for a full room makeover. That's when the light bulb went off. Tom, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a go at this design thing full-time, I said that night, my head full of dreams and schemes. Tom looked up from his paper. Full-time, huh? You sure you're ready for that? I clenched my jaw but kept my cool. I've never been more sure of anything. Well, then you better get to it. No sense in waiting around. he said, and went back to his reading. Not exactly a parade in my honor, but Tom was never one for big displays. He didn't say much while I set up shop, turned the spare bedroom into my office. He'd pass by the door, give a little nod if he caught my eye. Transformed the tangled mess of our yard into a garden people stopped to admire. I'd see him out there, leaning on the fence talking with passers-by about the flowers and the shrubs like he knew what he was talking about. One afternoon he came back inside, shaking his head. Some guy out there just offered me $50 to talk to his wife about doing up their yard. Can you believe that? I grinned, leaning back in my chair. We're a hot commodity, what can I say? With every chair I reupholstered and every light fixture I swapped out, my confidence surged. It was real work, getting your hands dirty, making things beautiful. And people paid for it, who would have thought? The hardest part was the learning curve, hanging drywall and not have it look like a dog's breakfast or figuring out plumbing without creating an indoor pool. But it was a good hard, you know? Satisfying. I finally felt like I was in the driver's seat of my own life, taking control and steering myself towards something that was mine and mine alone. Our house, with its fresh coat of me on every wall, every floorboard, it wasn't just a bunch of projects anymore. It was a signpost, pointing me to where I needed to go. Things were getting busier by the day, my phone was constantly buzzing with new clients, and my schedule was a jigsaw puzzle I was somehow supposed to piece together. Tom had been supportive of my work, but something had shifted lately. As my plate piled up, his seemed to empty, chores and all. "Mornin'," I greeted Tom, as I trudged into the kitchen, stepping over a pile of his work shirts. He grunted back, eyes glued to his laptop. At least he used to help with breakfast. "The basket's overflowing, Tom. Your turn, yeah?" I hinted, nudging the basket with my foot so it spilled onto the floor, hoping he'd take the hint. He sighed, not looking up. "Why? You're home all day." I stopped in my tracks. "Say what now?" "Look, you're always here," Tom continued, a little more carefully now, like he sensed the storm brewing. "Makes sense for you to handle the house stuff." "Handle the house stuff?" I repeated, my voice edged with disbelief. "I'm running a business, not sitting around here twiddling my thumbs." Tom's gaze finally broke from his screen. "Yeah, but I have to get to the office." I was about to argue, but the phone rang. Saved by the bell, or cursed, given it was another job to add to the pile. As the days rolled on, the pattern held. Tom's leave-behinds, coffee cups in the living room, newspapers scattered on the dining table, and those darn socks everywhere. You'd think he was trying to mark his territory. "Come on, Tom, this isn't the you I know," I said one Saturday morning, dishes clanking as I loaded the dishwasher with last night's remnants. "You used to care about this stuff. We were like two ships in the night, and I ain't talking about the romantic kind." He was off first thing, back when I was hip-deep in swatches and samples, and by the time he rolled back in, I was dead to the world on the couch, tablet still in hand. "Listen, Tom, we can't go on like this," I said one evening, dishes done, with enough energy left over to tackle what was really bothering me. "We're supposed to be a team." He looked like a teenager caught out past curfew. "Look, Clara, I just don't see the problem." I laughed, but it wasn't the happy kind. "You don't see? Okay. How about we start with you acting like this place is a hotel and I'm the service?" He opened his mouth, then shut it, like the right words had taken a detour. "I'm not asking for much. Just do your share. Act like you live here. Because, spoiler alert, you do." Tom ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wished he could disappear into the couch cushions. "Fine, I'll pick up the slack." "And?" I pressed. "And I'll start by sorting the laundry." "Now we're talking." I nodded, my arms crossed, but my lips trying not to smile, because it was either that or scream. It was a small victory, but I take M where I can get M. It was a reminder that for all the work, all the late nights and color palettes and textures and fittings, If your foundation is shaky, the whole house feels it. And I wasn't just talking about the renovations. I started noticing Tom was glued to his phone more these days. Eyes almost stuck to the screen. And then there was that haircut, the kind young folks are wearing, shaved on the sides and longer on top. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged it off, saying something about wanting a change. To me, it screamed midlife crisis loud and clear. It was finally the day we'd been plowing towards for what felt like forever. The mortgage was paid off. That was supposed to be our light at the end of the tunnel, our big reason to celebrate. So, on my way back from work, I dropped by the liquor store and picked up a bottle of the good stuff, the type that would make your wallet weep. I also got fancy cheeses, the sort with names too difficult to pronounce, and those artisan crackers that Tom liked. I was all set to surprise him. Walking into the house, everything was too quiet. Usually, Tom would be home by now, dinner on the go or some music playing. Not today. The place was dead silent. I called out for him, my voice disappearing into the silence. "Tom, you here?" "Nothing." I wasn't too worried at first. He could have stepped out for something, I thought. Maybe he went to get flowers, to add to the celebration, I hoped. I made my way to the living room and started getting the place ready for when he'd return. It was going to be a good night. We'd earned it. The expensive red would breathe a little, I'd get the snacks looking nice on plates, and we'd cheers to no more damn bank payments. But then I saw them, papers neatly stacked on the coffee table. Not thinking much of it, I reached over and that's when my heart took the first hit. Divorce papers with Tom's name already scribbled at the bottom in his unmistakable handwriting. For a good few minutes, all I could do was stand there. It felt like one of those prank shows where the joke's gone too far. But this was no joke. The realization sank its claws into me, and I could feel my hands shaking, my face hot. Damn it, Tom, what the hell is this? But I was talking to an empty house. I chucked the bottle of wine onto the couch, who cares if it stains, and sat down hard at the coffee table. This wasn't something you slip into conversation, this was a bang, it's over, out of nowhere slap in the face. I tried calling him. It just rang and rang before his voicemail casually invited me to leave a message. So I sat there for hours, waiting for him to walk through the door. I kept picking up my phone, checking if there were any missed calls, any texts. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The snacks lay forgotten and the bottle of red sat there, the unopened symbol of what was supposed to be our celebration. I remember when we bought this house. We thought this was it, we were set. But now there were just divorce papers and silence. And with every minute he didn't show up, didn't call, it was becoming crystal clear that he wanted out. But he couldn't even tell me to my face. Couldn't even give me a crappy excuse. Tom didn't come, and he didn't call. And I was left alone with a bunch of papers I never wanted, telling a story I didn't sign up for. When Tom walked in the next day, he wasn't alone. There she was, some young girl, looking at me like I'm yesterday's news. But this house, our house, she was eyeing it like it was hers already. "Oh, I wouldn't change a thing," she said as she flounced from room to room. "Except maybe the paint in the living room, brighten things up a bit. Don't you think it's a bit stuffy in here?" Her words, like she's marking her territory. Tom followed her like a lost puppy, then turned to me, "Brazen as you like. We will live here, Clara. In this house. With my new wife." I felt the anger boiling up inside, but I caught a look in his eyes, or maybe it was hers, and just like that, an idea sparked in my head. "Is that so?" I finally said, schooled my features into something calm, too calm. She pranced back in, still taking it all in, claiming it with her greedy little eyes. "Yes," she purred, "it'll do just fine." And then she looks at me like I'm some sort of bug under her shoe. But I'm not. I am the bug that knows where the dirt's hidden, knows exactly what to do when the time's right. I watched them, like a hawk eyeing its prey. Tom, he's talking numbers and moving dates, but I ain't listening. I'm plotting, thinking of every little way I could turn this back on them. Finally, I just smiled at them both. It wasn't a happy smile, but that's not what this was about. This was about wait and see, about holding your cards close to your chest. So I nodded. All right then. Tom paused, probably expected me to yell or throw something. But no, I'm playing this smarter. All right, he echoed, confused, searching my face for the catch. Yeah, all right. You two lovebirds deserve each other. The girl beamed, clueless, thinking she's got it made. And Tom, he had this look, like maybe he's dodged a bullet. But really, he's just fired the starting gun. I turned away to hide the grin spreading across my face. They think they've won, got it all figured out. But little do they know, I've got plans of my own. The game's just begun, and I'm about to make my move. I sat across from Tom at the kitchen table, a bunch of papers spread out between us. Let's make this quick, I said, tapping my fingers on the tabletop. I want my $200,000, what I put into the mortgage. I'm taking my stuff, and that's that. He was half listening, his eyes drifting to where his girlfriend was hanging around like an eager puppy waiting for a treat. Yeah, sounds fair, he mumbled, not taking his gaze off her. A smile, cruel and all mine, lifted the corners of my mouth. And by my stuff, I mean everything I bought. All of it. Sure, whatever. He was nodding along, not really caring or not realizing. Probably both. Tom's attention was all for the young thing, who was now stroking the back of the leather couch, one that I bought on a whim 3 years back because it looked classy and comfortable. We went down the inventory I'd prepared, point by point, and not once did he argue. Not when I claimed the flat-screen TV, not when I tallied up the kitchen gadgets, the high-end mixer, the chef's knives, the espresso machine that took me ages to pick out. With a distracted wave of his hand, he signed where I pointed on each paper. Signed our years away with less thought than he gave his fantasy football league. It took everything I had not to slam my fist on the table to get him to actually look at what he was giving up. But why bother? I was getting what I came for. And so, it was done. We signed our names, cleared the path for new beginnings, or in his case, a shiny new mistake. While Tom wandered out of the room, probably to chase his giggling girlfriend, I stayed put, relishing the weightlessness of ending it all. I heard her before I saw her, her voice like tinkling glass, all fake and pretty. She came into the kitchen, one-eyed turned from a 70s nightmare into a modern foodie paradise, and she ran her fingers along the granite countertops. He never cooked a thing in his life, I thought, and she probably can't boil water. You're old, but you have good taste, she said to me, a backhanded compliment wrapped in a sweet tone that didn't reach her eyes. I looked her up and down, my gaze pointed. Honey, good taste doesn't have an expiration date. But let's see how long your novelty lasts around here. And with that, I grabbed the box filled with photo albums, my favorite coffee mug, and a collection of fridge magnets from every state I'd visited and walked out without a backward glance. I didn't need to look back to know she was still standing there, probably puzzled by my refusal to fight. Good taste indeed. Let her find out, like I did, that marble and leather mean nothing without someone real to share it with. I had my memories, my dignity, and soon enough, a bank account that would turn that house into a distant memory. Moving day had all the drama of a bad TV show. Tom just stood there, mouth hanging open, as the movers made trip after trip out the door. Couch, gone. The fancy heaters I'd haggled for, gone. And yeah, when I said everything, I meant the kitchen sink too. That was a masterpiece of stainless steel, and it was mine when I walked in. It was mine walking out. His girl, what's her face, she lost it. Standing there in designer heels on the hardwood floor I picked out. This wasn't the deal, she hollered like she was calling the shots now. I leaned against the doorframe, every piece of paper with Tom's signature a shield. Deal was I take what's mine. That's it. Tom finally found his voice, a little wobbly but there. Clara, let's talk about this. There's gotta be. I cut him off with a wave of my hand. Talk? You signed, Tom. As clear as day. Everything I bought, I take. He ran a hand through his hair, the way he did when he realized he was in over his head. But the sink, Clara? Come on. I didn't budge. You should have read the list. Not my problem, you were too busy with her. I nodded towards his plaything, who was now scowling like a kid who'd been told Christmas was cancelled. But where are we gonna wash dishes now? She piped up, hands on her hips like she was in some sort of showdown. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Guess you'll figure it out, won't you? Tom paced now, a caged animal sort of look about him. Clara, we can't just. We need some of this stuff. How about the heaters? It's winter. I glanced at the wall where the heater used to be. Close work. Or hey, maybe you two can snuggle up for warmth. Clara. His voice cracked. Typical. Always loud when he was losing. We had an agreement, Tom. You agreed to 200 grand and for me to take my things. Well, I'm taking my things. That's fairness. That's getting what I'm owed. He went quiet, that defeated slump setting into his shoulders. His girl, she still didn't get it, feet stuck to the ground, her face twisted. This is total crap. I shrugged on my coat, the one I used to leave hanging on the hook, by the door. Your problems aren't my problems anymore, sweetie. I put on my sunglasses, grabbed my purse, and stepped out into the cold. The movers had the last few boxes ready to go, and I gave them the nod. Time to move on. Behind me, the door to the house stood open, letting out all the warmth. A pretty good metaphor, maybe, but I wasn't in the mood for poetry. I was in the mood for starting fresh. As I pulled away, I left them standing in an empty house that was once full of everything but love. Love they'd have to find on their own, without the comforts I'd brought into their lives. A month had flown by since the split, my new life slowly taking shape, when my phone buzzed with a number I knew too well. My ex, sounding all choked and lost, was on the line. I can't do this anymore, he groaned. I'm cooking, cleaning, it's all me, all day long. He told me how his young wife did squat, just flicked her thumbs on her phone screen or waltzed out with her pals. He was learning the hard way, juggling pots and pans, scrubbing toilets, and handling laundry. Please, can we try again? I made a mistake, he was practically begging, that note in his voice, like he'd never known a day's work in his life. I held the phone, a smile cracking across my face. You've got some nerve, I chuckled into the receiver. But you made your bed, now lie in it. Hanging up felt like dropping the heaviest bag I'd been carrying without knowing. Released from that old deadweight, I threw myself into my latest project, my very own house. Yeah, you heard that right, my house, not ours, not his, but my very own. As I stood in the entranceway, my new place was bustling with voices and footsteps. A blank canvas waiting for me to splash it with life. Hey lady, where do you want this box? One of the movers called out, struggling under a carton labeled kitchen stuff. Over there, by the counter, I directed, pointing him to the spot. The advance guard of my new abode was just me and a crew who didn't care about the past, just where to lug the next heavy thing. They'd drop a box, wipe their brows and ask where the next goes. A dance of starting anew. That night, with the boxes still piled high, it hit me, this wasn't just a new page, it was a whole other book. And I was going to fill it with wonders and blunders, scribbles, and scenes that made sense only to me. It's funny, how you think you need someone to make a house a home. But all you really need is to surround yourself with things that make you, well, you. Starting over? Yeah, let's paint this town with my kind of life.
To my son Ethan and his wife Jolene on their 3rd anniversary. Patricia's wine glass glinted under the chandelier's warm glow as she raised it with a sickly sweet smile. May your union continue to be blessed. The dining room fell silent as all eyes turned toward me. I felt the weight of Patricia's barb, thinly veiled beneath a veil of faux congratulations. My stomach twisted, but I forced an awkward smile and raised my glass to my lips, swallowing a mouthful of the dry Cabernet. "Thank you, Mother," Ethan spoke up from beside me. To my dismay, he didn't seem to catch the underhanded meaning behind her toast. "We appreciate you hosting this lovely dinner." "Yes, it's been wonderful," I chimed in, more for appearance than anything. As an art teacher, I could barely afford to take Ethan out for our actual anniversary 2 nights ago, let alone attend some lavish family affair at his parents' riverside estate. Patricia's gaze remained fixed on me as the echoes of glass settled back onto the table's polished mahogany wood. "Jolene, dear, I must ask, is everything quite all right? You seem a bit tense." My cheeks flushed as I straightened in my chair. "Of course everything's fine, just enjoying the evening as any wife would." "I certainly hope so." Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Raising a family is such a rewarding experience. No woman's life is truly complete without it." The room fell still once more as her meaning sunk in like a stone. Ethan and I had been trying, unsuccessfully so far, to conceive our first child. But to have it brought up so publicly, veiled as an insult about my self-worth as a woman, it took every ounce of restraint not to cause a scene. "I think we've had enough wine for one evening," I said quickly, rising from my chair. I shot Ethan a pointed look. "Shall we be excused?" He seemed to sense my unease. "Ah, yes, you're probably right, dear. Thank you again for dinner, Mother." We made our excuses and departed for the car, making small talk as Ethan drove us home. But once inside our apartment, I could no longer contain my anger. "Did you really not catch what your mother was insinuating back there?" I rounded on him as he hung up his suit jacket. Ethan paused, sighing heavily. "Jolene, you know how she can be. Mother's always been a bit dramatic." "Dramatic?" I cried out in disbelief. "Ethan, she insulted me. Implied that I'm some sort of failure as a wife because we haven't been able to get pregnant yet, and you just sat there letting her words hang over me like a judgment." He held up his hands defensively. Okay. Maybe her choice of words wasn't the best, but you know how important raising a family is to her and my father. She's old-fashioned that way." I stared at him, dumbfounded by his willful ignorance of his mother's cruelty. Patricia's toxic behavior had become such a normalized part of our lives that Ethan couldn't even see it anymore. As I readied for bed, I made a decision. I wouldn't allow this manipulative woman's narcissistic schemes to control our lives any longer. If Ethan wasn't willing to stand up for me, for us, then I would have to do it myself, no matter what line I had to cross. In the weeks following Patricia's anniversary insult, her meddling only intensified. Ethan chalked it up to her good intentions, but I recognized the manipulation tactics for what they were. "Have you considered looking into fertility treatments?" she asked during one of her impromptu visits to our apartment. "At your age, you can't be too careful about these things." I bristled at her implication that I was somehow defective. "We're still exploring our options, Patricia, but I appreciate your concern." She waved a hand dismissively. "Options, schmotions. My gynecologist is the best in the state. I'll have his secretary pencil you in for a consultation." "That's really not necessary." "Nonsense, dear. What sort of mother would I be if I didn't ensure the future of this family's legacy?" Her eyes bored into me. "We simply cannot have a third generation of—" She trailed off, letting the insult linger unspoken. I bit my tongue, fighting the urge to scream at this woman whose passive aggression knew no bounds. How Ethan failed to see the hurt she intentionally inflicted was beyond me. The next evening she arrived unannounced yet again, brushing past me into the living room with a basket laden with baby clothes and toys. "I took the liberty of purchasing a few essentials," she chirped, unpacking the frilly outfits and plush animals one by one. "Can't be too prepared for the little one after all." "Patricia, this is too much." I fought to keep my tone level as she presented each saccharine item in turn. "What did you expect us to do, wait until you finally managed to get pregnant?" She arched one perfectly plucked eyebrow. Lord knows how long that could take at this rate. The barb struck home, reopening the wound of her earlier slight about my womanhood. I opened my mouth, ready to unleash the torrent of anger boiling inside me, when Ethan appeared from the hallway, still in his work clothes. "Mother, what a lovely surprise," he greeted her with a tired smile. though you really didn't need to go to all this trouble." Patricia immediately switched gears, all sickly sweet smiles. "Nonsense, pumpkin. A grandmother has to take matters into her own hands sometimes." I watched in stunned silence as Ethan laughed lightly at her comment, bending to examine the frilly dresses and stuffed animals as if she'd committed no transgression. Later that night, as we readied for bed, I finally snapped. "Are you seriously okay with how she treats me? With her invasive advice and insults thinly disguised as jokes?" Ethan froze in his undressing, refusing to meet my eyes. "Jolene, you know my mother. She has a flair for the dramatic, yes, but she means well." "Means well?" I threw up my hands in exasperation. "Are you deluding yourself on purpose? Your mother is an insecure narcissist who takes cruel pleasure in needling away at me until I crack. That's enough." Ethan's voice took on an edge I rarely heard from him. "My mother is difficult, I'll give you that. But she's still my family, Jolene. I won't have you disrespecting her like that." I stared at him in disbelief, defending my abuser instead of validating the hurt I'd endured because of her. In that moment, I knew I couldn't rely on Ethan to see the light. If Patricia's reign of torment was going to end, I would have to bring everything crashing down myself. Patricia didn't let up in the following weeks. If anything, she grew bolder and more cutting with each unwelcome visit and condescending comment. The latest jab came at one of the dreaded Blackwood family gatherings, this one held at an upscale country club Ethan's father belonged to. As the dinner crowd settled in around the immense oak table, Patricia cleared her throat and raised her wine glass. "I'd like to start with a little toast," she proclaimed, that sickly smile plastered on her face. "To family and to new chapters on the horizon." My stomach clenched as all eyes turned toward me expectantly. This couldn't be another underhanded dig about my fertility, could it? "We've all been waiting so patiently," Patricia continued in that sugary sweet tone, "for the joyous news that the next generation will finally arrive to carry on our proud family name." I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold sense of dread creeping up my spine. She wouldn't dare? Not here? But alas, Patricia's expression soured into a dejected pout. "It seems some are simply unable to do their womanly duty and provide us with that happiness." The other relatives shifted awkwardly as the weight of her malice hung in the air. A few appalled gasps echoed from the far end of the table. "Mother, that's enough," Ethan warned, finally showing a flicker of backbone. But the damage had been done. Struggling against the torrent of shame and anger flooding my body, I pushed back from the table and stood, unable to even look at Ethan as he called my name. "Excuse me," I choked out, fighting back hot tears as I stormed away from the table. I had to get out of there before I caused a bigger scene than Patricia already had. The ornate country club bathroom provided a temporary sanctuary as I collapsed against the tile wall, thoughts swirling. How could she publicly humiliate me like that? Over something so profoundly personal, so heartbreakingly painful for me. Ethan's half-hearted protests meant nothing. He'd done nothing to stop his mother's cruel behavior before. Why would he start now? For so long I'd endured Patricia's escalating belittlements and dismissals, her demeaning jokes and underhanded comments. All while Ethan seemed to view them as mere eccentricities, something to be indulged rather than condemned. But this was a step too far, an unforgivable violation that could never be walked back or rationalized away. By the time I collected myself enough to return to the dining area, most of the other guests had departed, leaving just Ethan and his parents lingering awkwardly. Patricia avoided meeting my gaze, feigning nonchalance as she drained her wine glass. "There you are, dear," she lilted with transparent insincerity. "We were beginning to worry sick about—" "Enough," I spat, fury blazing in my chest. "I've endured your contemptible behavior toward me for far too long, Patricia. But I'll be damned if I'll sit idly by while you publicly humiliate me like that again." Ethan tried to interject, but I silenced him with a raised hand. "No, this ends now, one way or another. Consider this your last warning, Patricia." My voice dripped with venom as I turned on my heel and strode away, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan torn between calling after me or confronting his gobsmacked mother. As I peeled out of the parking lot, the wheels began turning in my mind. If she thought her little scene represented the depths of my humiliation, She had something else coming. It was time to take off the velvet gloves and fight fire with fire. There would be no more Mrs. Nice Jolene. The next afternoon, I met up with my best friend Rachel at a quiet cafe downtown. As I rehashed the humiliating scene from the country club, listing off each vindictive comment and backhanded insult from Patricia, Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Jolene, I can't even find the words." She shook her head slowly. "How does Ethan not see what a manipulative witch his mother is?" I shrugged helplessly. "At this point, I don't think he's capable of viewing her objectively. She's had him under her thumb for so long, disrespecting me is just normal behavior to overlook." "Well, you can't just let her get away with that kind of cruelty," Rachel insisted, leaning forward. "After how she humiliated you, you have to make a stand. Expose her for the toxic narcissist she really is." The idea struck a chord within me, stoking the flames of righteous indignation still smoldering from the previous night. Rachel was right. I could no longer sit idly by while Patricia's mental abuse escalated unchecked. Ethan's willful ignorance meant I couldn't rely on him to intervene. This was something I'd have to take on myself, no matter how drastic the measures. "You're absolutely right," I said, conviction filling my voice. "Patricia has had her way for far too long. It's time to stop being the bigger person and hit her where it really hurts, her oversized ego." Rachel arched an eyebrow. "Oh, do tell, dear friend, what diabolical revenge scheme have you concocted already?" "The Blackwood Family Gala," I replied darkly. "The biggest event of their social calendar, happening next month. A who's who of Atlanta's elite, all gathered under one roof to gossip and flaunt their wealth. The perfect venue to air Patricia's dirty laundry for all to see, tarnishing her carefully curated appearance in front of everyone that mattered in her materialistic circles." "Think you can get a hold of evidence?" Rachel prodded. "Conversations, documents, anything that could prove how disturbed she really is?" A faint smile crossed my lips. "Leave that to me. I know just where to start looking." Over the next few weeks, I began compiling an arsenal. Archived emails from Patricia containing underhanded criticisms of my family, my career, my ability to be a proper wife. Audio recordings from my phone capturing her condescending comments verbatim. I even managed to obtain a few pages from Patricia's private therapy notes, courtesy of a very disgruntled former employee at her doctor's office. The narcissistic observations, the blatant disdain for anyone outside her wealthy inner circle. It was all right there in black and white. With each new piece of irrefutable proof, my determination compounded. This wasn't just about getting payback against a cruel mother-in-law for years of emotional abuse. This was about dismantling her self-constructed pedestal, exposing the truth behind the immaculately maintained facade for all to see. I knew there would be consequences, that irrevocable bridges would be burned. But at this point, I simply didn't care anymore. Patricia's reign of toxic manipulation had gone on for far too long already. One way or another, I would be the one to finally bring her world crashing down around her. Over the next couple of weeks, I worked meticulously behind the scenes to gather allies and cultivate my plan for Patricia's downfall. It wasn't hard to find others who had been on the receiving end of her manipulative wrath over the years. My first co-conspirator was Ethan's cousin, Maya. At the latest Blackwood family gathering, I pulled her aside during the dinner reception. "I take it Patricia hasn't been any kinder to you over the years?" I asked without preamble. Maya's eyebrows shot up, but she quickly recovered with a humorless chuckle. "The woman's cruelty knows no bounds. Why, just last Christmas she had the gall to disparage my body in front of the whole family." She leaned in with a conspiratorial smirk. "Let's just say the molt hasn't been kind since giving birth." "Say no more," I assured her. "Look, I'm putting together let's call it a demonstration against Patricia's tyrannical reign, an eye-opening experience for the oblivious masses who enable her emotional abuse." Maya's expression turned intrigued, even hungry. "Do tell, dear cousin-in-law, what did you have in mind?" I laid out my scheme to leverage the upcoming Blackwood Gala to reveal Patricia's true colors, the undoctored truth behind her pristine facade of Southern gentility. To use her own insidious words and behaviors against her in a devastating public expose? By the time I finished, Maya's eyes were alight with devious glee. "Consider me a willing accomplice in your master plot." She grinned wickedly. That miserable hag has it coming, and then some. Over the following days, Maya proved instrumental in helping me gather more damning evidence from disgruntled former employees and service staff. Turns out the generous tips Patricia bestowed carried plenty of strings and resentments attached. We even managed to enlist the sympathies of her own sister, Sarah, who had long borne the brunt of Patricia's ruthless favoritism. Just a few recordings of the two sisters' volatile arguments provided enough vitriol to make our case. My final ally, however, took some delicate persuasion to bring into the fold. During one of her tense visits to berate me, I finally took the opportunity to confront Ethan about his continual enabling of his mother's abuse. "I cannot go on like this any longer," I stated bluntly after she had excused herself to powder her nose. "Your mother's behavior has become completely unacceptable and intolerable." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet my gaze. "Jolene, please, can we not revisit this again? Mother's just set in her ways, that's all." "Set in her ways?" I echoed in disbelief. "Ethan, wake up. That woman is a toxic, manipulative narcissist who revels in making others miserable, me especially. If you refuse to put a stop to her cruelty once and for all, then I will." His eyes widened as I laid out the entire scheme, the evidence, the co-conspirators, the plan to decimate Patricia's immaculate reputation in one fell swoop at the gala. For a long while he simply stared, seemingly in stunned silence. Then, slowly, resignation crept across his features. A weariness settled into his eyes as he seemed to truly see the damage his mother had wrought, not just to me, but to their entire family. "Do whatever you feel you must," he said at last, exhaustion seeping into his tone. "I think I've enabled her for far too long already." With Ethan's reluctant capitulation, the game was set. We had everything required to bring Patricia's reign of terror to a decisive, humiliating conclusion on the biggest stage imaginable. All that remained was to see our master plan through to its ruthless finale. The night of the annual Blackwood family gala arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Well, for me and my co-conspirators at least. Patricia and her oblivious entourage of sycophants were completely unsuspecting. We arrived fashionably late to the opulent country club ballroom, Patricia preening as she worked the room. Her public persona was in full force, every hair perfectly coiffed, every pearl and stitch of designer couture immaculate as she greeted Atlanta's elite with syrupy platitudes. I had to fight to keep the sneer off my face watching her performance. But soon, very soon, that genteel facade would come crashing down in spectacular fashion. "Good evening, Mother," Ethan greeted stiffly as we approached. "You've certainly outdone yourself this year." "Why, thank you, darling." Patricia oozed magnanimity, grasping his hand. "I simply had to ensure tonight was an occasion to remember for us all." Her eyes bored into me as she added with an insincere smile, "For the good of the family, of course." I refused to take her baited response, merely nodding curtly. "It's certainly an opulent affair." "Shall we take our seats, then?" Ethan interjected before Patricia could fire another loaded barb. "I believe the program is about to commence." We filtered into the cavernous ballroom, taking our places at the extended family's table near the front. All around us, Atlanta's wealthiest elite mingled and air-kissed, sipping champagne and evaluating each other's designer frocks with judgmental eyes. Patricia certainly knew how to cater to their vapid vanity. As the halting speeches from various dignitaries droned on, I caught Maya's eye across the table. She subtly patted the clutch in her lap, the signal that the evidence was ready and waiting for its grand unveiling. On my other side, Sarah sipped her wine casually, masking her own eager anticipation. She'd been waiting a lifetime to stick it to her cruel younger sister. Finally, the excruciating parade of long-winded tributes concluded, and the gala hostess took the stage to turn over the mic to Patricia for her traditional closing remarks. "What a resplendent evening we've had, hasn't it?" she began in her oozingly aristocratic drawl. "Truly, I'm humbled to see so many of our community's finest joining us in celebration of family, legacy, and the refined bloodlines that shape—" The first thunderclap of transgression cut through Patricia's fatuous words like a gunshot. In an instant, the ballmom's eyes blew wide as her own recorded voice filled the hushed ballroom. "That ungrateful freeloader needs to get off her ass for once and earn her keep around here. the recording snarled with dripping condescension. "Mark my words, if she can't get pregnant soon, she's out on the street. No daughter-in-law of mine." Another recording blared just as suddenly, this one capturing a verbal assault on poor Maya in all its ugliness. "Look at you, you repulsive disgrace. Your thighs are more waddling than your hips these days. Why, I'd nearly mistake you for one of Shamu's calves if the smell wasn't so revolting." With each successive audio clip, more of Patricia's unvarnished malice filled the ballroom. Her contorted features shifted rapidly between disbelief, rage, and panic as every bigoted insult, every gaslighting manipulation was laid bare for all to hear. The elite masses she put so much stock in watching reacted with a mixture of shock, revulsion, and grotesque fascination. Exactly as I'd anticipated. Elite society thrived on cruel voyeurism. So transfixed were the onlookers that my clandestine projector setup across the ballroom went completely unnoticed until it was too late. With a few taps on my tablet, I activated the overhead screens, displaying the most damning excerpts from Patricia's therapy sessions for all to see. By the time her hate-filled words about minorities and the poor stretched across 10-foot text, Patricia was apoplectic. Her rage twisted her face into something vile and inhuman, the perfect embodiment of the soulless monster she'd striven to conceal. "No! No! How dare you!" The shriek clawed its way from her throat as she finally realized the full extent of my orchestration. You treacherous little..." But her venomous diatribe went unfinished as Sarah finally abandoned all pretense and hurled the remaining contents of her wine glass directly into Patricia's face. "That's for a lifetime of misery, you hateful cow." In an instant, the once refined gala descended into pandemonium. Revelations sparked furious confrontations. Humiliated society elites turned on one another as scandals erupted on all sides. Fistfights and broken champagne flutes exploded amidst the hysteria. And there, silhouette against the maelstrom, stood the crumbling remains of one Patricia Blackwood, disgraced, discarded, and utterly defeated. As the riotous scene unfolded, I simply watched in cold satisfaction, knowing I had well and truly slain the beast. My revenge was finally complete. The days following the gala explosion were a whirlwind of backlash and bitter confrontations. The fallout from my exposé decimated the Blackwood family's sterling reputation across Atlanta's upper crust. For once, the masses Patricia had put on a pedestal got to witness her true, unfiltered venom firsthand. Furious donors withdrew funding from the various charities and organizations the Blackwoods generously and publicly patronized. Country club memberships were swiftly revoked. The family's impeccably maintained social facade lay in irreparable ruins. Throughout it all, Patricia remained unrepentant, lashing out at anyone in proximity. Wild-eyed rants spewed from her withering lips, labeling me an ungrateful, vapid peasant, intent on destroying her family's legacy. Ethan attempted to play peacemaker, but it was impossible to douse the raging inferno I'd sparked. The truth of his mother's depravity had incinerated any remaining delusions about her character. "How could you do this, Jolene?" he demanded one evening, voice ragged from the endless screaming matches. "You've brought shame and ruin on us all." I simply shook my head in cold disgust. "Don't act so bloody shocked. That vile woman's actions were indefensible, as your own silence constantly demonstrated." Ethan recoiled as if struck, suddenly aware of how obtusely he'd enabled Patricia's emotional torture all these years, how he'd willfully turned a blind eye to my anguish in a misguided bid to preserve his perfect family's image. I never intended." His words trailed off into wearied resignation. The light of realization battled in his eyes, but I refused to grant him any absolution yet. I'd suffered far too long for such easy contrition. As the Blackwoods descended into squabbling over the smoldering remains of their family legacy, I stood firm on the outskirts. Their entire sordid legacy stemmed from one truth: unchecked narcissism, fueled by wealth and enabled by obedient silence. Even now, Ethan's father Randall attempted to bully his way into regaining control, lobbing threats of retribution laced with noxious bigotry. The poison tree merely producing its rotten fruit, but they could threaten and bluster all they wanted. Thanks to the irrevocable proof of their true natures displayed before Atlanta's elite, the Blackwoods were now utterly discredited. Contemptible social outcasts, left to wallow in infamy and face the consequences of their abusive supremacy. Only when the fires finally died down a few weeks later, when Randall and Patricia had retreated in disgrace from public view, only then did the enormity of my actions finally sink in. My triumph had come at an incalculable personal price. The towering walls of glass and steel that insulated the Blackwood's dynastic opulence from Atlanta's unworthy masses were shattered beyond repair. And in the aftermath, every sordid detail of our private turmoil had been laid pitilessly bare. I expected Ethan to lash out anew, to decry my willingness to dismantle his vaulted family legacy in the name of vengeance, to accuse me of going too far in my bid to discredit his manipulative matriarch. What I didn't expect was the resignation in his eyes when he finally emerged from the wreckage to face me, the tacit acknowledgement of how completely he had failed me over the years, how thoroughly Patricia's insidious influence had poisoned our once vibrant union. There would be no easy path forward for us. Too much pain remained, too many open wounds left seeping from the detonation of my merciless retaliation. But for the first time in longer than I could recall, I saw the unflinching truth reflected in Ethan's gaze. Sometimes the only way to cauterize an infection is to burn it out completely. The weeks following my explosive gala takedown were a bitter whirlwind. The Blackwood family was in utter disarray, their narcissistic empire of influence in tatters. Through it all, Ethan and I kept our distance, speaking in terse sentences when absolutely necessary. The chasm between us gaped wide, rendered impassable by the devastation of my vengeful actions. A part of me wondered if we'd ever manage to salvage anything from the scorched earth I'd created. But I steadfastly refused to allow any lingering doubt or remorse to fester. Patricia's cruelty had gone unanswered for far too long. She and her enablers deserved to reap the karma they'd so ruthlessly sown. Then, one quiet evening as dusk settled over the city, a terse knock sounded at my apartment door. I frowned, setting aside my half-graded stack of student artworks to answer it. Ethan stood in the hallway, hands jammed in his pockets, expression a mask of weary resignation. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Do we?" I arched an eyebrow. I was under the impression there was nothing left to discuss after what Please. The word emerged hoarse and strained. "Just give me a chance, Jolene. One last chance before—" He trailed off helplessly. Despite my lingering bitterness, that haunted look in his eyes gave me pause. Reluctantly, I stepped back to allow him inside. For a long while, we sat in uneasy silence, the weight of months of pent-up grievances and unspoken accusations hanging heavy between us. I found myself studying Ethan anew, searching for any hint of the man I'd fallen in love with before his poisonous family slowly crushed his spirit. When he finally spoke, the words emerged as a tortured rasp. "I don't know where to even begin. What you did, the lies you exposed, the willful cruelty." He shook his head slowly, amazed that even now the full extent of his mother's malice proved so stunning. "Your mother was an insecure, narcissistic tyrant," I said bluntly. "A miserable, toxic woman who took sick pleasure in destroying anyone who dared defy her twisted worldview." Ethan's flinch was visceral, as if reliving one of Patricia's verbal lashings all over again. But I showed no remorse. He needed to confront this harsh truth head-on. "And worst of all," I drove the point home further, "you were too weak to ever stand up to her manipulations, even when I begged you to intervene. Her brainwashing rendered you utterly impotent." The accusations hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. Rather than lash out in denial or defensiveness, Ethan merely nodded in weary acknowledgement. "You're right. I allowed my family's toxic dynamics to fester for far too long. To control me, shape my reality until I was just numb to the abuse hurled at you, at everyone around us." He lifted his gaze to meet mine, naked remorse burning in his eyes. "I failed you, plain and simple, as a partner, as the man who vowed to love and protect you above all else." For the first time in longer than I could remember, I saw the struggle for redemption warring within him. It wasn't enough to simply capitulate after the fact. He had to actively fight to dismantle the insidious conditioning Patricia had inflicted. Only then could we endeavor to salvage the tattered remnants of our relationship and rebuild from the rubble. "It won't be easy," I stated, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "That woman's venom has been allowed to infect us for far too long. But if you're truly willing to fight for us, to reject her narcissistic reign once and for all—" A flicker of hope gleamed in Ethan's eyes, reinvigorated determination burning behind it. "Then you'd better be prepared to run beside me every step of the way." His answering nod was resolute, the old ghosts of hesitation and weakness exorcised by the raging fires of truth. It was a start,